began with a tree, a 100-foot poplar swaying in silence between two of the most dangerous borders in the world. A simple tree, trimmed to clear a soldier's line of sight. But North Korea saw it as an insult. Minutes later, 2 American officers lay dead, hacked with their own axes. But what followed was madness. This is not a movie. This is not satire. This is real. In response, the United States launched one of the most absurdly overpowered military operations in history: warships, jets, special forces, all to cut down a single tree. This is the story of Operation Paul Bunyan, the most expensive tree ever cut down, and the moment the world stood on the edge of World War III. To understand why America reacted this way, we need to go back to the most dangerous border on Earth and a tree that blocked the view. At the most dangerous border on Earth, where every breath carries the weight of war, a group of soldiers approached a tree. Not to fight, not to invade, but to trim its branches. It was a warm August morning, August 18, 1976, in the Joint Security Area, JSA, of the Korean Demilitarized Zone, known as Panmunjom. On one side, North Korean soldiers, watching in eerie silence. On the other, US and South Korean troops, performing what seemed like a routine task. That task? Trimming a poplar tree whose thick branches blocked visibility between Observation Post 3 and a key checkpoint. The tree stood right in the middle of the DMZ, a place where one wrong move could ignite a war. U.S. Army Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett led a small team of American and South Korean soldiers to carry out the pruning. No weapons were drawn, as per DMZ protocol. Just a work detail. Just a tree. But then, the silence cracked. From the North Korean side, a group of about 30 soldiers, led by a man known only as Senior Lieutenant Pak Chul, crossed the line and began shouting, "You must stop cutting the tree. It was planted by the great leader. You have no right." The situation escalated instantly. Axes meant for trimming turned into weapons of war. The North Korean soldiers attacked, violently, without warning. In less than a minute, blood stained the soil of the DMZ. Captain Boniface was beaten to death on the spot. Lieutenant Barrett was chased and hacked down with axes, dying in the most brutal way, while trying to escape. Their bodies were left broken on neutral ground. And the world had to ask itself, what do you do when your men are murdered over a tree? To understand why a single tree could provoke violence, we need to understand where this story takes place, a place like no other on Earth, the Korean Demilitarized Zone. At first glance, the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, might seem like a contradiction. A 160-mile-long strip of land, 2.5 miles wide, where no military activity is allowed. And yet, it's the most heavily militarized border in the world. On one side, South Korea, backed by the United States and the United Nations. On the other, North Korea, led by Kim Il-sung, the founding dictator of a secretive, militarized regime. The DMZ was born from the Korean War, a brutal, bloody conflict that lasted from 1950 to 1953. Over 3 million people died. The fighting ended in an armistice, not a peace treaty. That means, technically, the war never ended. Even in the 1970s, the two Koreas were still locked in a Cold War-era standoff. Every day, American and South Korean soldiers stared down North Korean troops, just feet away. Guns loaded, tempers high, tensions permanent. And right in the middle of it all was Panmunjom. Panmunjom, the Joint Security Area, is the only place in the DMZ where both sides stood face to face. Soldiers from both sides patrolled without weapons, a fragile symbol of peace held together by protocol and mutual fear. But peace here was always an illusion. Dozens of border incidents had already taken place. Soldiers shot while defecting. Patrols ambushed. Propaganda loudspeakers blaring 24/7. North Korea was unpredictable, their actions often bizarre, provocative, and violent. U.S. forces constantly had to prepare for war, even while pretending not to fight one. And that brings us back to the poplar tree. Its branches blocked the line of sight between OP-3, a key UN outpost, and Checkpoint 3, where American and South Korean soldiers moved daily. In a place where seconds could mean life or death, visibility meant survival. So when the Americans decided to trim the tree, it wasn't just landscaping. It was about safety, control, and power. But in North Korea's eyes, even that was an insult, an act of defiance that demanded blood. It was just a tree, a gnarled poplar, rooted deep in hostile soil. But where it stood made all the difference. In the shadow of barbed wire, landmines, and machine gun nests, the poplar tree looked out of place. It stood nearly 100 feet tall, wide-branched, and seemingly harmless. But its location was anything but innocent. The tree grew right next to Bridge of No Return, a small road that connected the United Nations-controlled section of the Joint Security Area to the North Korean side. Every day, soldiers and officers crossed this road, patrolling between Checkpoint 3 and Observation Post 3, known as OP-3. But the tree's massive branches blocked the line of sight between these two positions. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. If a soldier came under attack at OP-3, reinforcements couldn't see them, couldn't cover them, couldn't save them in time. In the DMZ, visibility is survival. Blind spots mean death. The Americans had made repeated requests to trim the tree. But the North Koreans, who saw symbolism in everything, refused. To them, that tree was a monument, possibly even claimed to have been planted by the great leader himself. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. What mattered was that in the Cold War logic of the Korean Peninsula, every detail was a contest of dominance. To the US and South Korea, trimming the tree was a minor act of maintenance, a routine, safety-related decision in neutral ground. To North Korea, it was an insult, a provocation, an assault on their sovereignty. But with tension always simmering just below the surface, no one expected violence. Not over a tree. And yet, 3 days before the full moon of August, that tree would drink the blood of American soldiers. August 18, 1976. 10:30 a.m. A day that would forever change the rules of engagement along the DMZ. The morning began like many others at Panmunjom, tense but quiet. The sky was cloudless. The air, thick with humidity. A 12-man team of U.S. and South Korean personnel moved toward the poplar tree, carrying axes and sickles. Their task, trim branches obstructing visibility from OP-3. At the front of the detail, Captain Arthur Boniface, 33 years old, calm, respected. First Lieutenant Mark Barrett, 27, newly assigned, observant. Several South Korean soldiers, UN command personnel, and Korean Service Corps civilians. They were unarmed, per Joint Security Area Protocol, a rule meant to keep peace, even in the world's most dangerous standoff. As the men began trimming the tree, North Korean guards approached. Among them was Senior Lieutenant Pak Chul, a known provocateur. U.S. soldiers had nicknamed him the Bulldog. Small, aggressive, always confrontational. He stood watching silently, for a moment. Then he spoke. "Stop immediately. You are not authorized to touch this tree." It was planted by the great leader. Captain Boniface didn't respond. He waved to continue the work, calm, professional, dismissive of the threat. This infuriated Lieutenant Pak. Within seconds, Pak shouted in Korean. Suddenly, over 30 North Korean soldiers stormed in, many wielding axes, clubs, and sharpened tools. Improvised weapons turned lethal. What followed was not a scuffle. It was an ambush. It was fast, brutal, one-sided. Captain Boniface, caught off guard, was attacked by multiple soldiers at once. Beaten with fists and axe handles, he fell within moments, motionless. Lieutenant Barrett attempted to flee down a small ravine toward OP-3, but the North Koreans chased him. Witnesses say he was cut down with axes, his body left mutilated and unrecognizable. The other U.S. and South Korean personnel tried to defend themselves with tree-trimming tools, but were overwhelmed. It lasted less than 4 minutes. 2 dead, several injured, all unarmed. The poplar tree stood still, silent, indifferent, as blood soaked its roots. The surviving American and South Korean team members managed to retreat. Reinforcements arrived too late. Photos taken in the aftermath show blood splattered on the ground, a mangled axe discarded near a body, North Korean soldiers watching coldly from a distance. The U.S. soldiers retrieved the bodies. For hours, silence returned to the DMZ. But the message was clear. North Korea had drawn blood. On neutral ground. Without provocation. The images and eyewitness reports were immediately sent to the Pentagon. 2 men dead. No shots fired. No war declared. But war suddenly felt very, very close. That night, a military alert was issued across the Korean peninsula. U.S. bases were locked down. Soldiers were placed on high alert. Bombers were repositioned. Nuclear-capable forces were quietly prepared. And in the White House Situation Room, President Gerald Ford sat down with his military advisors and asked one chilling question. What do we do when our people are murdered with our own tools? 2 officers slaughtered in a surprise attack. On neutral ground. Under a flag of peace. The world waited to see what America would do. Within hours of the axe murder incident, the U.S. military in South Korea moved to DEFCON 3, the same alert level used during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Troops on all major U.S. bases were recalled. Fighter jets were armed. Bombers were fueled. Aircraft carriers in the Pacific changed course. At the White House, President Gerald Ford met with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, and top Pentagon brass. The mood was grim. The stakes were high. And the options dangerous. The military presented several responses. A targeted airstrike on the North Korean barracks. A raid into the DMZ. Even a decapitation strike on Pyongyang. Each option risked open war with North Korea, and possibly with China or the Soviet Union. But the U.S. needed to respond. The attack wasn't just a local skirmish, it was a strategic insult. The soldiers had been unarmed, on a routine UN mission, and murdered with tools they brought to trim a tree. And to make matters worse, North Korea doubled down. The regime released a statement calling the event a righteous act of self-defense against U.S. imperialist aggressors. They blamed the Americans for starting the fight. They refused to apologize. Instead, they held rallies, celebrating the deaths of the 2 officers. This wasn't just provocation. It was theater. Psychological warfare. The U.S. knew that if it showed weakness, North Korea would become even more emboldened. But if it struck too hard, the Korean peninsula could erupt into full-scale war. That's when a new idea emerged from the Pentagon. Something symbolic, yet forceful. Something that would send a message, not just to North Korea, but to the entire world. What if we finish the job, but do it with such overwhelming power that no one dares to respond? An operation was quickly drawn up. A mission that was non-lethal on paper, but militarized to absurd levels. We'll cut down the tree, they said. But this time, we'll bring the entire U.S. military with us. President Ford gave the green light. Code name, Operation Paul Bunyan. The name was ironic, a reference to the giant lumberjack of American folklore. But behind the humor was calculated menace. The message was clear. You killed our men with axes. Now we're coming back with an army. What do you do when your men are killed over a tree? If you're the United States military, you go back with everything. The mission was simple in theory: cut down the poplar tree. But the U.S. didn't want to just trim branches anymore. They wanted to send a message, one carved in steel, power, and fire. Planning for Operation Paul Bunyan began immediately after President Ford gave the order. And within 48 hours, a multi-branch task force was assembled that looked more like an invasion than a work crew. Let's break it down. Small Blue Diamond, the ground team. The actual cutting team consisted of just 16 engineers, equipped with chainsaws, axes, and demolition gear. But they were escorted by a full security platoon of heavily armed soldiers. Two 30-man South Korean Special Forces teams, known as the feared ROK Commandos, wearing face paint, martial arts uniforms, and carrying automatic weapons. They had orders to kill if even a single shot was fired. They looked like they came from a movie, but they were deadly real. Small Blue Diamond Air Support. Overhead flew B-52 Stratofortresses, diverted from Guam, nuclear-capable, unmistakable silhouettes in the sky. F-4 Phantom fighter jets screamed above the DMZ, circling in combat formation. Nearby, F-5s, F-80 SIXS, and KC-135 tankers stood by, fully fueled and armed. Small Blue Diamond artillery and armor. The entire 2nd Infantry Division was put on alert. 27,000 soldiers, tanks, and artillery pointed straight at North Korea. Cobra attack helicopters hovered low, scanning the horizon. Behind the front line, USS Midway, a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, moved into striking distance, loaded with fighters and bombs. If war broke out, the U.S. would be ready to level the Korean peninsula within hours. Small Blue Diamond psychological warfare. Meanwhile, radio communications lit up across the region. Leaflets were prepared. Intelligence networks watched for North Korean movements. The CIA monitored the Soviet and Chinese response. No one was sure how far this would go. It was a tree-cutting mission, with the full weight of global annihilation behind it. The South Koreans matched the U.S. intensity. Their forces lined up along the DMZ, bayonets fixed. Fighter pilots waited in cockpits. The mood was revenge. There was no attempt to negotiate with the North Koreans before the operation. No warning. No apology. Just one quiet signal from the command center. Execute Operation Paul Bunyan. August 21, 1976. 3 days after the murders. The largest tree-cutting mission in world history was about to begin. The poplar tree had stood in defiance. Now it would fall beneath the roar of 1,000 engines. At exactly 0700 hours, the operation began. The 16-man engineering crew, dressed in crisp fatigues and flak vests, approached the poplar tree with chainsaws in hand. No one spoke. Every move was practiced, every man knew the stakes. Behind them stood the security platoon, rifles ready. Watching from the south, perched in sniper nests, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and bunkers, were thousands of U.S. and South Korean troops. To the north, North Korean guards peered nervously from their posts. They didn't move. They didn't interfere. They simply watched. Overhead, the thunder of engines echoed across the sky. B-52 bombers held formation, their nuclear payloads ready if things went wrong. F-4 Phantoms and F-5s patrolled low and fast. Cobra attack helicopters hovered like vultures, machine guns aimed downrange. Every eye on the peninsula, and far beyond, was watching. And then, the chainsaws roared to life. The sound shattered the tense silence like a declaration of war. But the North Koreans did nothing. In a matter of minutes, branches began to fall. Bark split. Sap sprayed. The poplar tree, once a symbol of stubborn resistance, now trembled under the precise and cold efficiency of men who weren't here to prune. They were here to erase it. Meanwhile, the ROK commandos stood in silent readiness, their faces painted in camouflage stripes, blades strapped to their thighs, eyes locked on every North Korean movement. They were not just a visual deterrent, they were a death squad in waiting. They had orders. If a single North Korean crossed the line, they were cleared to eliminate every last one. The felling of the tree took 42 minutes. It wasn't quick. It wasn't clean. It was methodical, intentionally slow, like a ritual execution being broadcast live to an enemy audience. As the final cuts were made, the engineers stepped back. A rope was pulled, and with one last creaking groan, a sound that echoed like thunder in the DMZ, the poplar tree collapsed onto neutral ground. It was done. The tree that had caused bloodshed was gone. And North Korea had done nothing to stop it. But the Americans weren't finished. They left behind a 6-foot-tall tree stump, carved smooth. On top, they placed a small brass plaque, inscribed with a simple message. In memory of Captain Arthur Boniface and Lieutenant Mark Barrett. August 18, 1976. The chainsaw stopped. The tree lay on the ground. Not a shot had been fired. But the message was clear, and the silence from the north was deafening. The moment the operation ended, U.S. and South Korean forces remained at full alert. No one trusted that it was over. Troops waited, watching the North Korean side of the bridge of no return, expecting retaliation. But none came. In a regime known for bluster, there was only stillness. Within hours, something astonishing happened. North Korea contacted the United Nations Command. They delivered a rare, nearly unprecedented message. Kim Il-sung expressed regret over the incident. It wasn't quite an apology, but in the language of international diplomacy, especially from an iron-fisted regime like North Korea, it was a public retreat. The exact wording: the serious accident that occurred in Panmunjom on August 18th was not planned by us. We regret that it happened. The United States had achieved something extraordinary. They avenged their dead, made a show of dominance, and forced a face-saving concession, all without firing a single shot. It was psychological warfare executed with military precision. But the consequences of Operation Paul Bunyan went beyond that one day. Small Blue Diamond DMZ reinforcements. In the weeks that followed, the entire DMZ was hardened. The tree site was cleared and opened for unobstructed line of sight. Guard posts were fortified. Rules of engagement were rewritten. Deadly force was now authorized instantly in the event of provocation. Small Blue Diamond, a warning to the world. The operation sent a chilling message across the globe. To the Soviets, America could respond to minor provocations with major unity. To China, the Korean peninsula remained a flashpoint that could spiral instantly. To allies, the U.S. would not allow its men to die without consequence. But most of all, it left a mark on North Korea. After the operation, Kim Il-sung reportedly purged several commanders involved in the original incident. He began a series of internal power shifts to consolidate control. Many believe this was an early step toward grooming his son, Kim Jong-il, for eventual takeover. Paul Bunyan didn't just cut down a tree. It shook the regime itself. Small Blue Diamond: The Legacy. In the years since, Operation Paul Bunyan has been studied by military academies as a case study in measured escalation, where a maximum show of force was used to resolve a crisis without war. To this day, it's known as the most expensive tree ever cut down in human history. Cost estimates range in the millions of dollars, given the number of aircraft, personnel, and equipment deployed, all to remove a single tree. But to the Pentagon, it was worth every cent. Because in that moment, America didn't just cut a tree, it drew a line in the dirt with an axe and dared anyone to cross it. In the history of war and peace, few things are as absurd or as dangerous as what happened at the Korean DMZ in August 1976. The poplar tree may be gone, but its shadow still looms large. The axe murder incident and Operation Paul Bunyan became symbols of more than just a border dispute. They became lessons in brinkmanship, in how close the world can come to catastrophe, over symbolism, over pride, over something as simple as a tree. To this day, military and diplomatic leaders study the event with a mix of disbelief and awe. Because had even one bullet been fired, if even one plane had dropped a bomb, the entire Korean peninsula could have ignited. And that ignition in the middle of the Cold War might have brought in the United States, North Korea, South Korea, China, and possibly the Soviet Union. One tree could have sparked a nuclear chain reaction. Some historians call Operation Paul Bunyan a masterpiece of military signaling. No compromise. No miscommunication. Just overwhelming force, deployed but restrained. Others see it as a massive gamble, where the U.S. stared into the abyss and bet everything on the enemy blinking first. Either way it worked. But history doesn't guarantee second chances. Let's not forget the two men who died, Captain Arthur Boniface and Lieutenant Mark Barrett. Their deaths were sudden, brutal, and unnecessary. But their loss forced the world to take notice of the dangerous absurdity of the DMZ. The memorial plaque placed at the site of the tree stump still stands today, a quiet reminder that this place is not just a line on a map. It's a fault line of history. In military circles, Operation Paul Bunyan became almost mythical. Instructors teach it, officers admire it, and in pop culture, it has been referenced in books, documentaries, and online discussions as the most over-the-top non-combat operation ever launched. It's a story that sounds fictional, like a dark comedy or a war satire. But it's entirely real. A tree was cut down by a task force larger than some nations' entire armies. It didn't make sense, and that's what made it terrifying. Operation Paul Bunyan remains one of the most surreal chapters in Cold War history. A moment when a superpower showed it could go to the brink and pull back, but only just. It was a warning to enemies, a message to allies, a lesson for future generations. Sometimes the biggest wars aren't fought with bullets or bombs, but with silence, steel, and the roar of chainsaws echoing through no man's land. And above all, it was a reminder. In a world always on the edge, even a tree can become a trigger.